is almost completely Republican except for the Chicago area. Now, why is that? Now, don't answer out loud, please. You'll have your own theories. And we're really not talking about politics today. But I want you to reflect on that. Philadelphia, the state of Pennsylvania, is largely Republican, mostly Republican except for Philadelphia. Why is that? You know the whole red state, blue state philosophy? If you go, why is it that the more conservative places are rural? Why is it that when we move into big cities, values change? Now, how many watched the Republican debate recently? I did. Maybe we don't have anybody here who cares. But Ted Cruz got into a lot of trouble. You remember what he said? He said New York values. He said Donald Trump has New York values. And today that is not. It's so funny for somebody like Donald Trump, who makes his whole deal about being politically incorrect, took advantage of Ted Cruz being politically incorrect. Because he said New York values are different. You're more likely to believe in abortion. You're more likely to run up debt, so on and so forth. And that doesn't mean that I'm not getting into that debate. But there is a difference there in those values. There is no question. Ted Cruz is right. And if you deny that, there is a difference. It doesn't mean there aren't good people in New York. I'm sure after 9/11, they did rebuild that city. They did have a spirit of togetherness. They did do some wonderful things that express godly values. But in this church, we're not really concerned about political values, are we? We're really more concerned with godly values. And everything that we talk about in the context here is in regard to the text and in regard to what God seeks for us. So we don't care if it's Republican or Democrat. We want to come back to what the Bible says and be conformed to what that says. So, with that though, but what we're going to be hitting on today has to do with these values. Because in Jesus' day, it was absolutely no different. No different whatsoever. And we're going to look at a place today that had very, very different values than where Jesus chose to do 80% of his ministry. All right, we're moving along here. Moving right along. This is a picture, by the way, of where we're going to be. This is on the far east side of the Sea of Galilee. We are standing in a place called the Decapolis on a hazy day. And essentially, it's a beautiful view, probably one of the most beautiful views of the Sea of Galilee that you can get anywhere. And we are standing right above this, right in this area right here is where we believe a demon-possessed man was healed by Jesus. Men, depending on what gospel version they're both correct, but there was two in one. This is where we believe he sent the herd of pigs down the mountain into the water. So to stand there is a pretty neat place. But when you look at what the Decapolis was, let's take a look at the text. Chapter 4, verse 23. Jesus went through Galilee. You're standing in Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness among the people. News about him spread all over Syria. Now, you know where Syria is. You just watch the news, and you'll know where Syria is. And the people brought him all who were ill with various diseases, those who were suffering severe pain, demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and healed them. Large crowds from Galilee, the Decapolis, which is what we're going to say today, Jerusalem, Judea, and the region across the Jordan, followed him. So when we get to the word Decapolis, immediately when you think of those regions, I want you to be able to put the people groups with those regions. I want you to be able to know what are the implications. So when we read that list, is Jesus just ministering to Jews? Or is he ministering to everybody? He's ministering to everybody. When it says people from the Decapolis came, the Decapolis was largely Gentile. And we'll take a look at some of that today. They were also sophisticated compared to what we see in the triangle. Let me come back through here. Let's move on. Do we remember the three major groups We've gone through this, I think, the third or fourth week we've mentioned this. There's three major people groups that live around the Sea of Galilee. Who do we have over here in Tiberias? Herodian, those are compromisers, people who said, hey, I don't want to fight the government, and Judaism is important, but we can bend the rules here or there to conform with the government. Not a big deal. Let's just all get along and be happy. Does that philosophy sound familiar today? Sure it does. Sure it does. Then we had, over here at the top, we have the triangle, three major small towns. I say major small towns because they're major in the Gospels, but they weren't really that large at the time. Three major towns: Bethsaida over here in the east, Capernaum, which is right here on the seashore. Actually, it's up here. And then you have Chorazin. All three of those cities had woes said to them because they had a problem with following the Lord on the outside, but not following Him on the inside. But that was a very religious area. It was a small town area. There wasn't a lot of sophistication there. Even though it was on a trade route, it was a very small, they were small places. The people were simple people. It was in the archaeological remains of those places, you don't see idolatry unless you dig down back into the time of David, and you can get some paganism there. But during the time of Jesus, there's no idolatry there. There's synagogue. It's on at least from the outward appearance, a pretty nice place, a good place, a godly place. Doesn't mean they didn't have their issues with inside. That's what Jesus came and gave them the woe about. But overall, when you compare it to the rest of the places, they by far, at least on the outside, were godly people, simple people, living their lives to the best they knew how. And then we have the Decapolis, which is over here on the right. And actually, the Decapolis comes out and then way down. It's a big area, and that's what we're going to talk about today. First of all, the Decapolis was known as the land of the seven to the Jews. And if you look at rabbinic literature, you'll see them referred to the land of the seven. And the land of the seven, you say, well, what's the seven? Seven what? Well, if we see in Joshua, it says, this is how you will know that the living God is among you, that He will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. These people were pagan nations in Canaan, and when we see Joshua coming in to purge the land of that paganism, these seven nations were driven out. The question is, where did they go? And essentially, in Jewish thought, they went to the Decapolis. Now, whether they all did and everybody's family went there, who knows? But that's at least what Jewish thought was, that they went to the Decapolis, up there just a little bit northeast of the Sea of Galilee. And that's where they lived, because they were driven out. And where did they go? They just didn't cease to exist. And in Acts 13, 17 through 19, we see that God of the people of Israel chose our fathers. He made the people prosper during their stay in Egypt with the mighty power. He led them out of that country. He endured their conduct for about 40 years in the desert. He overthrew 7 nations in Canaan and gave their land to the people as their inheritance. So when you talk about the Decapolis to an Orthodox Jew, you're saying it's the land of the 7. Now, is that a good connotation or bad connotation?
The Jew would be a very
bad connotation. It's like Shelby's deciding he wants a little bit more of an exciting life, so he's going to move to Las Vegas. Now, there's good people in Las Vegas, and he's going to move to a little apartment right down on the strip. Wow. Oh, see, Carol went, ooh, yeah. Some of you didn't hear that. That's a joke. That's an example. He's not really moving to Las Vegas. And there's great people that live in Las Vegas. I've met them. But the values are different, are they not? You can't walk down and have porn handed to you and porn on the sides of the roads. And that is, again, let's align to the text, not politics. But so if we told you that, or if you have somebody driving a Corvette and their license plate says 777, what does that mean? What does that mean in our culture? 777, that's on their license plate. Big, nice, shiny Corvette, and they have 777 on the back of their. You know, this is good that you don't know this stuff. Yeah, because if you play a slot machine or sometimes you get 777, it's the sign. It's lucky. It means you're lucky. 7. Yeah, see, you guys don't know that stuff. That's good. Yeah. So it's such an innocent crowd. So you would think that the name has a connotation, or if you have somebody who has a black car with a big skull hanging down from the rear view mirror, and it says 666. What's that mean? That's pretty bad connotation, right? It's got a bad reputation. Land of the Seven, same connotation. You say land of the Seven, you're like, oh, who wants to go there?
Why do they use a Greek word to refer to it?
Decapolis? Decapolis, because it just means 10 cities. And it was Greek. The Decapolis gets its name from the era of the Grecian era through Alexander the Great. Yeah, good point. Deca means 10. Polis means city, city-state. So it's and that's what it means. So let's move on. History of the Decapolis.
Joe,
Sure.
The Greeks would have said it's because there's 10 cities. That's why we call it Decapolis.
Correct.
But the Jewish would have said that just means
Land of the Seven.
Said tribes of God broke that.
Correct. Now, whether they actually were by blood or not, nobody really knows. But at least when they move out, and when you look at this place, it was detestable to Jews. No question. So we have Alexander the Great arrives in Israel about 334, 333, somewhere in there, and he liberates them from the Persians. Okay? And he's going to go ahead and give his men who fought well for him land. And he's going to give them tracts of land, and he thinks that the Hellenistic worldview is superior. He thinks if you want a world empire, he said, give me 4 things, and he was a great missionary, and I don't mean a godly missionary, but if you want somebody, and I think this is where divine sovereignty comes in personally. Alexander the Great propagated Hellenism throughout the world and essentially made most of the world one. Even though he died at 33 and never lived to enjoy it, he thought that worldview was similar. Now, we could talk a whole quarter on Hellenism, but the bottom line of Hellenism is that the individual is most important, that the human body is beautiful, that you are right there with the gods. The gods are superior, but your intellect, your mind, is right up there with God's. It's what you think that matters. That's why sometimes in our Sunday school classes, when we talk about, we get into discussion, and sometimes discussion isn't, or in any other place, isn't based on text. It's based on what we think. It is embedded in you, within you, in this culture. It is embedded in you that you think that what you think has a lot more value than what it really does. Does that make sense? And what I think. In this culture, the culture instills in me that what I think should be right up there. Okay? And that's not really correct. At least it means that, well, you're taking from Aristotle and Plato. And these guys are all about the government controlling things. They're about the individual, the artwork, everything around even the artwork. If you look, you ever heard of the Vitruvian Man? You know, you see the Vitruvian Man? If you take those dimensions, and that's Greek. It's appreciating the body, and you put it up to the Parthenon. It's the same exact dimensions. All their architecture is designed around the human being, and their philosophy centered around the individual. Meaning, what the Western or the Eastern philosophy, the Hebrew philosophy, was never around the individual. It was around the collective. It was around the group. A great example of that is back in Joshua. You remember when the man had stolen, what was his name? Oh goodness, my brain's leaving me. What was his name? He stole the devoted things? Achan. He was Achan for a lesson. Achan stole the devoted things. And then if you read in there, that's a beautiful verse on the mindset of the Eastern Hebrew. Because it says that Israel sinned. Israel stole the devoted things. And we are saying, what? Israel didn't steal anything. This one guy did that. Yet God held the whole community accountable for that. And in our society, we say that's not fair, that God, 36 people had to die when they tried to go into Ai because God wasn't with them. 36 people died because Achan stole the devoted things. Is that fair? No, it's not. Sure.
Well, similar to the first sin. Man sinned, but God thinks mankind sinned.
Great point. The whole Eastern versus Western mindset of how people think about the individual versus the group is different. In Eastern Hebrew society, you would never cheat on your wife. Not because of your wife, but because of your community. Where in our society, in our culture that's driven by the entertainment, New York, Los Angeles, those are our two hubs for cultural influence. They're saying, cheat on your wife if it's what you want to do. People will leave their wife and kids, and they ask him, why do you do that? This was my brother-in-law. It happened to me in my very own family. He said, my preacher went to talk to my brother-in-law about why he left his wife and 3 kids. He said, because I just wanted to be happy. I.
But is it true that, would it be correct to claim, though, that New Testament Christianity does have a touch of Hellenism in it? I mean, the New Testament was written in Greek, perhaps for a reason, just like the Old Testament was written in Hebrew. We do tend to think in terms, in Christianity, more of the individual, perhaps, than they did in the Old Testament. I mean,
well, that's a great. Let's put this in context of the New Testament. Let's take your comment and put it in the context of the New Testament, because you're absolutely right. Because who did Paul go to? Paul was an apostle to who? The Gentiles. He went to the biggest, as a matter of fact, he was attracted to the Greek states. Where did he want to go? He wanted to go to Antioch of Pisidia, Roman influence. He wanted to go to Rome. All these places that Paul went, he wanted to go to these Greek. Ephesus, you can't get any more Greek than Ephesus.
and don't you think it was written in Greek for a reason?
Absolutely, it was written in Greek for a reason. Sure, but there's no better language that the Bible could have originally been written in Greek, and we can't get into that today. But that's thanks to Alexander the Great. That's why I think God's sovereign nature allowed these things in history to happen, because we have now the benefit of the Greek manuscripts that are so descriptive. The Greek language is beautiful in that you can just look at the word and dissect it and know exactly what it means. And I'm not an expert in Greek, but I've read enough to know about it, how amazing it is. And it's no coincidence that happens right there at the time of Christ. Same way with the Roman government, when you're going to propagate God's word throughout the whole entire world. So Alexander comes through, and he says, give me 4 things. He says, the theater, the arena, education, and religion, and I'll change the world. Does that sound familiar? In our society, are the arts important? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I said are older. I've seen this happen.
Yes, you have. You've seen, how about sports? How about sports? Sports important? That's the only biblical reason to miss church is if the Super Bowl's on, right? Somehow you get a biblical pass. If that's a joke too, yeah. Some of you can. If the Super Bowl's on, you can miss church. No big deal. It's. And then the religion, because the arts, the sports, education will all deal with the here and now, but then the religion will maintain and deal with the why question in life. Why are you here? Science will never answer that. Why are you here? Science will never answer that. So you have to have religion, and that's where they come in with the temples to the Greek pantheon, Zeus, Athena, Apollo, Aphrodite, Dionysus, Artemis, and any city that you go into, in the Decapolis, or in the Greek world for that matter, is designed around those 4 things. The very first thing you typically see in a Greek city, you have something called the Cardo. Have you ever heard of the Cardo? The Cardo is the north-south street. Then you have the Decumanus, which is the east-west street. So your city's based around a big cross, and you know what's right there at the entrance to the city? A temple. It's usually at the higher place. It's the temple. If you come in and you have the arts, and in their day, it was a lot like it is today, only without a rating system for people. Sports, the education taught Aristotle and Plato. You want to know Greek thought, go read Aristotle and Plato. Plato thought that you as a parent, I did a paper on this in graduate school. Plato thought that because that you have really no good ability to raise your children, it takes a village. Does that sound familiar? That you as the parent have no right to your children, and what's in the best interest of the government is that you give your child to the government, and the government will raise your kids in the academy, and they will train them in the worldview, and they will do the job right. That's Plato. So Alexander grants his soldiers large plots of land for these Greek settlements in these 10 cities. And at this time, keep in mind that as all the, most of the headquarters of these big groups come from the, when I say headquarters, I mean places like Greece, Macedonia, Rome. And so people are pushing their way east. And as they push their way east, they always want a secure line. So in the Roman era, the Decapolis becomes a very, very important place. So the Decapolis is a major place at the time of Alexander the Great. It's being built, it's beautiful, it's sophisticated. They have the big four there, the arts, the sports, the education, the religion. And then we get to the time between the Testaments, which is actually all this is happening between the time of the Malachi and Matthew. And once we get there, then the Hasmoneans take over Israel. Let's just move on to that. The Maccabees, Hasmoneans, take over, and the Decapolis has some of its glory, loses some of its glory because it's disassociated with a major empire. In other words, the Israelis, the Hebrews, say, enough of this Greek stuff, we're going to fight the Greeks, and they win. And they get their own autonomy, at least until the Romans take over. And when the Romans take over, they do so, I would not say peacefully, but it's more peaceful than what other transitions were. And then you get to the Roman era. And the Romans want that secure eastern line, and so they start to pour more money into the Decapolis to strengthen it. And this is done under the Roman governor Pompey. In 64 to 63 BC, he revitalizes Decapolis into a vibrant Hellenistic group of cities. And Herod the Great took the same things. Herod the Great liked Hellenism. He enjoyed, all you have to do is look at the models of the temple to see that Herod liked the whole idea of Hellenism. And this is why Jews did not typically, at least the Orthodox ones, did not like Herod. And the pagan religions of the Decapolis held that the swine was a sacred animal, and so that will enter into our story as well. All kinds of pagan religions. If you go up to Caesarea Philippi, if you go to the Decapolis, you're going to see all types of paganism in the archaeology. A very mixed up people who had really no real foundation for how they lived their lives other than the temporal things that would please them in some capacity. Here is probably one of the best examples of a Hellenistic city in the Decapolis. It's called Beth Shan. Beth Shan is, this is the place where Saul and Jonathan's body were hung outside the city. All the ruins that you see here are not from that period. You're standing on top of a tell. And a tell, essentially the city is probably underneath where we're standing. But you look at the newer city, and you're looking at this Greek city-state from some of it's first century, some of it goes way later. But essentially, if you'll notice a few things here. Number one, you have the Cardo, and then you have the Decumanus, and then you have the Agora, you have the bathhouse, you have the theater. You see those things? All of those things are Greek. All of those things, especially the Agora, the marketplace. In Acts 17, you'll read about Paul. And you know where all his opposition was kind of birthed? In the marketplace. You'll notice that. Well, and where is he? He's in Thessalonica. It's a Greek city. It's a Greek city. This is an amazing place. This is sophisticated. When you look at the sophistication of where Jesus did his ministry, I'm not saying it's better or worse. It's an interesting analogy that Jesus didn't. We have no record of him coming here. Now, this is on the major route going south, so he may have walked through here. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. I would never say if he did or not. But this is sophisticated. This is where we live, essentially. Let's take a look at some of the things. This is the theater there. I mean, it's beautiful. They still use it to this day. They've refurbished it over the centuries, and recently even to. They have concerts there, the whole 9 yards. It's a neat place. Anybody know what that is? Now, this is a big deal. This is a really big deal for the public. This is right outside the theater. Any?
I know what I'm thinking, but I'm afraid to say.
You're afraid to say. You're probably wise. Yeah, that's a toilet. Those are toilets. Yeah, I'll just spit it out. Yeah, those are the toilets. The dirty water ran in the big trough to the left. The clean water ran in the trough to the right. And when you went to the restroom, you would have segregated. They were not segregated. You would go in to use the restroom with everybody. Imagine that. Any of our folks going to combine the restrooms for efficiency? No way, right? We even have stalls, right? They didn't even have stalls. So, I don't mean to gross you out. In this next picture, that was our tour group. You can still sit on those. You can still sit on those things today, very sturdy. But that's how that's the. You've been to the restrooms at stadiums. Well, this is essentially what it is back in antiquity. Here you have this is Ray Vander Laan, one of the guys that I was learned under, a very smart, neat man. You have the arena here, the games, a lot of attention focused on the games. Athletes were paid a lot of money. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, it's not anything new. And then that's a nice picture that I took. This is when you walk in, if you go back to that picture of that Sean, nothing is like this in the triangle. Nothing. I find that fascinating. It was much more simple. It was much more simple. This would be like Lexington, or this would be like Louisville. Being in Richmond, we have a simpler lifestyle here, do we not? I travel to Washington, D.C. all the time, and I have to go out into the suburbs and Reston and those areas, and I will tell you, it is a madhouse. It is an absolute madhouse. I would not live there. I'd quit my job and go pick up cans on the side of the road before I live in Reston, Virginia, or the Washington, D.C. area, because it's so crazy. The cultures come together. I love Richmond. It is simple. We have one main road that goes through the town, don't we? One main road. You got two nice stores. If you get mad at one, you could go to the other. It was different here. It was different here. First thing, this is the temple. This is a temple to Dionysus. This is the first thing that you see when you walk in. You might make a sacrifice to the god of this place, and this is the whole thing that detested the Jews. And it's the very first thing you see when you come into the city. It's at the heart of the city. That's a model, by the way. And the work that went into this is Turkish marble in Israel. Turkish marble in Israel. You know how far that is to drag? And there is like 700 AD, something like that. The earthquake came and all these pillars came crumbling down, and this stone broke. But this is one. A person is about. This is about 6 feet from here to here. So that is one massive piece of stone they drug all the way across the continent to put up here in this Greek city-state. Amazing. Amazing. That's something about Las Vegas today. You go to Las Vegas today, and you go to Caesar's Palace. I've been there on business, and you walk up and you see these amazing pillars with all of the statues, and you go up to this massive pillar, and you knock on it, and it goes dong, dong, dong. It's hollow. It is nothing but a facade. This wasn't a facade. This wasn't a facade. This was the real thing. Lots of care, workmanship, craftsmanship, all to build the glory of this city and to espouse its sophistication. Bath houses. This is where a subfloor would sit on top of this. They would light fires out here. The hot air would come in, and this is where you would get your nice sauna. Same way up the sides of the walls. You see the same type of construction in Masada. Remember Masada out in the middle of the desert? Herod had himself a bathhouse in Masada that was run by wood and heat, and they'd heat the floors and the walls, and you would walk in there on maybe a cold morning, and you'd be able to enjoy your nice hot bath. I'm not going to go into that one today. A lot of emperor worship here. This is Kaali architecture. It's a type of building. This is actually from Sardis, and it's a great example of this type of architecture that would be prevalent in these Greek city-states. And it was also a place where you would worship your gods. Oftentimes there are inscriptions across these places. Statues of the gods would be placed in here. This is a gymnasium, by the way. That's a place where people would come and train. It's a great picture of a gymnasium because this is where you would go to school in the Greek city-states. You would come here to train and learn that Greek philosophy. Now, let me show you something else. What about those? What you just saw? Of all that sophistication, the marketplace, the indoor plumbing, what impressed you the most about that in antiquity? Which one of those things impressed you the most? No right or wrong answer here. I'm not tricking you.
I think the size of it.
The size of it? You know, when you walk, Ray Vanderline, one of the things we do on the tour is we bring you in the back door of Bet Shan. We don't walk in the front door. You walk in the back, and you walk through the woods, and you walk up this hill, and then all of a sudden you get to that beautiful expanse. And the response from people who go is always the same. Wow, check that out. It doesn't matter that there's mountains right over here, a whole mountain range that God made. It's like what man created. Doesn't it? There's beautiful mountains in the distance and hills and plants. And when you come up the top of that hill, you say, wow, to a bunch of ruins.
Joe,
Mm-hmm.
I think of the different countries that have been in power through the world, and none of them like it. None of them like it. Greece didn't like it. Rome didn't like it. Egypt before that didn't like it. Persia didn't like it. We think sometimes, and I think they thought at their time, this is fabulous, monumental, stupendous. Nothing could ever beat it. It's the most wonderful thing in the world. And most likely, it will fall. If time stands, it will fall. God's kingdom is the only thing that lasts. And I think that's where we should learn lessons from that. We better put our treasure ahead.
So you take all that, absolutely. Store up yourselves treasures in heaven where the moth or rust doesn't eat away and disintegrate. So let's take a look at where Jesus ministered now. How about that? You impressed by that? That's Chorazin.
If you'd had to build it, you'd have been impressed.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. By the way, that's his sons. These are called insula. Couple more. This is Capernaum. How about that? Those white stones weren't there in the day. Now, it probably was a pretty beautiful synagogue there, but overall, you're a very, very simple place. If you look at Peter's house, there's tradition. I showed it to you a few. You didn't see it to any degree. There's not a whole lot to see. It's an octagon, and it's probably less than the size of maybe an eighth of this room. I mean, it's very, very. Maybe our nursery is about the size of Peter's house. They didn't live inside. They lived outside. Inside was for sleeping, and maybe eating, but most of their life was done outside. Not a whole lot there. This is Bethsaida. Wow. When you get there, the first thing that crosses your mind, if it weren't been who was raised there, you'd go, what are we doing here? Big deal. But that's the beauty of it. This is where Jesus decided to go and spend his time. And I'm not saying that you can't live in a city and be a Christian. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. But I think there's a lesson, there's something there that I think that would be helpful to us in our Christian walk. You can live in New York City and be a Christian, no question about it. But you better be aware of what's going to come at you in those environments. If you're going to sit down and watch TV for a whole lot of hours every week, you're letting New York and LA values come right into your house. So you better watch out. Can you be a Christian and watch TV? Sure you can. But you better watch out when all that other stuff comes at you, because it will change you. And there's Bet-Shan. Let's take a look. We've only got a couple of minutes left. Here's Gerasa. I've not been there, but it's another amazing city in the Decapolis. And this is Hippos Sosida, another Greek place. This is at the heart of where lots of interesting things here. Talk about more sophistication. There are some of those pictures I showed you. I don't know if I showed them to you or not. That's plumbing. Let me show you this. Any plumbers in the room? Look at that. How about making pipe out of that? You take a stone and you knock a hole through it and then create a margin around it so it fits up with the next one. And you do that for about 20 miles. And 20, maybe 10. But still, you make me go 12 feet and I'll be there my whole life trying to try to carve something out like that. That's how Hippos Sosida got their water supply. That's sophistication. That's Greek. You don't see that. You see wells in the triangle. You don't see any of that sophistication. This is where, when Jesus calms the storm, he leaves from his side, from the triangle. He leaves from there. And we're not going to read the whole thing. You know that. They were all terrified, asked each other, "Who is this?" Even that the wind and the waves obey him. You remember that. Then he went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. There is if you have an NIV study Bible, you're going to notice the Gerasenes could be a mistranslation because if the word Gerasenes is true, you're going to notice that the region of the Gerasenes was about 6 miles southeast of the Sea of Galilee. So if that's true, when Jesus drove the demons into the pigs would have had to run 6 miles to enter the sea. If you think it's the region of the Gadarenes, if you think it's that, then they ran 35 miles to enter the sea. And I don't think that's the case. The text indicates that it was right there. So essentially what this means is it's the region of the Gerasenes, which Kursi Hippos would have been in the region of the Gerasenes, and the NIV study notes are not aligned. They didn't run 6 miles to go into the sea. You can tell that from the context of the story. But then Jesus, he gets in his boat and he says he went to the other side. The other side is the Decapolis. And he goes there and he gets out of his boat, and this is what it would have looked like when he got out of his boat. And you can see up in the distance here caves in the side of the mountains. Does any of that sound familiar? If you know your Bible, it does. This is where the demon-possessed men were. And these are some of the caves that you can still go in today. They were living there, as the text says. That's what I was just telling you about. This is a view from inside one of those caves. So when you see Jesus approaching, this is what it could have looked like. Not saying this was the cave, but this is most likely where that was. And then he heals the demon-possessed man. Now, and because of time, we're supposed to end right now. I got about 5 minutes of leeway, so I'm going to use it. But you have... When Jesus heals these 2 demon-possessed men, he sends the pigs, remember, and he goes down the hill. Matter of fact, I've got that picture, but I'll show it to you in a few minutes maybe, or some other time. But as Jesus healed them, remember what was unique about this man? After this man was healed, that he was naked, and then all of a sudden Jesus heals him, and he comes back and he's well-dressed. He's in his right mind. And what does this man want to do? He wants to follow Jesus, right? He wants to follow Jesus. And what does Jesus tell him? Stay here. He says, go home and tell your family what the Lord has done for you, which is neat. And Brian Starron did a sermon on this about 2 or 3 weeks ago. He was talking about this, and he told you this part. He didn't tell you the next part. It's a little harder to crank out. It's a little harder to find in the text if you got to put all the Gospels and the stories together. Jesus comes back to this region 4 to 6 months later. He comes back to the Decapolis. And he got out of the Decapolis and he saw large crowds of people coming to him. How did those people know? Somebody went and told them. And then you know what Jesus did right after that? He fed them. That was the feeding of the 4,000. Isn't that cool? So here you have this man, and I guess what I'll leave you with today is this man didn't know a whole lot about theology. This man didn't know, but he just went and told. He just went and told. And a whole lot of people were able to be exposed to Christ because this man just did what he couldn't help do otherwise. And I think that's a beautiful way to close our time. Let's see if there's any other pictures I can get to here. Oh, there's the hill. That's the hill we think the pigs ran down. It's pretty steep. Over time, the Sea of Galilee is silted in some. So, but that's the best place that it could happen. Today, you don't get off. You see that? See these? Right here, I'm not too sure, but you got to be real careful hiking in the area because in '67, and Syria was in the 6 Day War. They were trying to come in, and if you get off the trails, they have signs all over the place that says, "Don't get off the trail. There's mines." So that gives you a pretty good hint not to get off the trail. And that's the Decapolis. So now, when you read about Jesus went to the Decapolis, and he went to the other side, now you'll have a much better feel for where he was going. This was a largely Gentile group. Yet he loved them all the same and even fed them and provided for them provision just like he did for the Jews before. Let's close with a prayer. Lord, thank you for, we say thank you so much, but it seems like the best thing that we can express to show our appreciation, our love, our gratitude for the life that you lived here on earth. It was perfect. Not a sin, not a regret. And we hold you in awe for that, and that's why today we'll worship you with all our heart, with all our soul, and all our strength. In Jesus' name, amen.